Can you tell us a little bit about your experience in Wales? Because I know your role is, I guess, a direct result of changing values.
Yes, absolutely. So Wales is the only country in the world to have legislated to protect the interests of future generations through our Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. But it actually does a number of things, bringing three sort of concepts together. So first of all, we set out 7 national wellbeing goals, which are linked back to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So putting those on a statutory footing, critically important. It embeds this concept around, how do we test our decisions and whether they balance the needs of current generations and future generations. And then it's sort of, it's called the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And the definition of well-being or the requirements of our legislation on all of our public institutions is to improve the social, economic, environmental and cultural well-being of Wales. And so that then really permeates through all of our policy making. So the Act applies to our government and to 43 other public institutions delivering services and policy to the public at all levels. And I think, we've seen a number of shifts in terms of public policy resulting from our legislation, from something which I think is really interesting, our new Beyond Recycling strategy, which sets an ambition for Wales to be zero waste by 2050. At the moment, we're 3rd in the world for our recycling rates, but actually we're saying we need to go beyond that and actually be sort of refusing and reusing and reducing and so on, not just recycling. But what's really interesting in terms of the approach that this legislation is driving is that in developing that strategy, our government has actually made the connections between zero waste and community well-being and tackling loneliness and isolation. Now, you might say, what is zero waste got to do with loneliness and isolation? Well, it's actually all about how you decide to go about doing that. So, zero waste for us is doing things like establishing community libraries, libraries of things. There's a Welsh word which is benthyg or borrow. And so part of our strategy is library of things, where instead of everyone in your street having a lawnmower stuck in their garage taking up room, actually what we're going to do to reduce waste and reduce consumption is have a library where you can borrow a lawnmower or a paint stripper or a hedge trimmer or any of those things that you might need. We're also going to establish repair cafes. So you can go along, and this is where you make the link between community cohesion, loneliness and isolation, and reducing waste, because you bring those two things together. People interacting in their communities, reducing waste, but also connecting, conversing, building relationships and so on. And the fact that our civil servants have actually made those connections, and they've looked at, this holistic approach to across our 7 national wellbeing goals, which cover improved health and wellbeing, cover ecological resilience, cover the circular economy, cover inequality and community cohesion and so on. How can we develop our policies in a way which speak to and act on as many of those 7 wellbeing goals as possible? That's the sort of difference that I think legislating can make. And I just want to say a brief word about the government's economic strategy. So I suppose one of my favourite things when I tweeted about the government's economic strategy, and sorry about my son wandering around there in the background. But one of the things that I was really proud of, I tweeted about this economic strategy, and someone tweeted back from Scotland, I think, saying, can everyone just take a moment and pause and look at this economic strategy, which does not mention GDP? What I want to tell you that the economic strategy does say is right up front, it says improving the well-being of everyone in Wales is the government's economic mission. Recognising the potential for the economy to do harm as well as to do good. And it talks about a holistic approach to the economy, focusing on delivering people's well-being. Now, there are still some challenges in terms of how do you take those words and change the habits of very many lifetimes, very many decision makers who might not be, acting on those words. But I think we're off to a pretty good start. And I think the key thing for the Happy Planet Index is, how do we go beyond it being a metrics to compare and to see where we are and how we're doing, to it actually being a framework which is used to determine what policies governments and others take forward.